Well, let's talk about this with historian and author Martyn Whittock. Good morning to you, Martyn.
Good morning.
I mean, here we go again. I kind of thought, though, there's more important things to talk about today, but this really does matter. It is utterly ridiculous. I can imagine a scenario then, if this were the case, we would have a situation where, extraordinarily, someone who was maybe, I don't know, working as a cleaner, working as a hospital porter, working in a low-paid job, who was black and British, paying taxes that would go towards reparations to, I don't know, Kemi Badenoch, who the Black Tory leader of the Conservative Party, because black people would be entitled in Britain to reparations, but the taxes that would pay for it would be paid for also by the black people living here. On what possible basis is there an argument for people living in this country, by the way, all of whom came here through choice, not through dragged here by slavery, to be given reparations for slavery?
I think it's a non-starter. Not all people of African descent in the UK, anyway, are from communities equally impacted by historic slavery.
Exactly.
We know some, a minority, but some West African communities actually cooperated with slavery. And whilst the UK clearly was responsible for much wrong, we can't ignore the terrible things done by slavery. It then, after 1807, took costly action against the slave trade. And since then, large amounts of foreign aid have been paid by the UK, and rightly so, I would say. So my basic position is it's not possible to hold present generations responsible for past wrongs. And I've changed my views on this, I hasten to add. And the right way forward now is for the UK to play its part in international efforts to support developments in the global south and efforts to combat poverty and disadvantages in this country, with targeted assistance and educational initiatives, not handing out sums of cash to individuals. It's the kind of thing that grabs a headline, but it doesn't actually address significant issues of poverty or disadvantage.
No, but also, can we just explain the fact? I mean, slavery was awful. Every single empire has carried out slavery. If we're going to pay reparations for the Atlantic slave trade, I want reparations paid to my country from the Danes for the Vikings and from the Italians for the Romans. Simple as that. If there is no time limit on this, then we'll have that money as well, please. But also, crucially, we would like to be compensated, or pass compensation on, from, as you say, those West African nations where it was official policy to round up fellow Africans and sell them to the slave traders. I mean, the idea is just so preposterous. And also the idea that the Caribbean nations, the reason why many Caribbean nations are poor is not because of a history of slavery. The reason why many Caribbean nations are poor because they've got kleptocratic, completely and utterly corrupt, incompetent governments. And I'm not entirely sure why any of my taxes should pay for any of that.
I mean, clearly, this kind of statement grabs headlines, but it doesn't deal with the difficulties and the realities of global inequalities and disadvantage and so on. And what we need is a grown-up conversation amongst countries to say, what can we do to help each other? What can we do to improve governance? What can we do to improve the terms of trade? But simply handing out sums of cash to people grabs a headline, but it does not engage with the seriousness of the issue, which is, how do we deal with the problems of the world in which we now live, which we can't ignore and have to engage with. But we have to do it in a more grown-up way than in a way that, although well-meaning, just grabs headlines but doesn't actually tackle the real issues of what it means to be in 2025 in a complex and
there's a
world.
very strong argument that, OK, anyone who came to Britain who doesn't come originally from a slave, slave-owning, part of the world. So if you come from West Africa, well, then, of course, originally you're not eligible. But even so, you could argue very strongly that given the state of what's happened in many West African countries over the last couple of centuries, that the people who are the many, many, many generations descendants, they are in a better place, whether in the Caribbean or in Britain right now, than they would have been if they stayed in West Africa. What happened to their ancestors was appalling and disgusting and a crime against humanity, as it was when it happened under every other country and every other empire and every other civilization which has also taken slaves. But the idea that someone whose great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother was taken by the Atlantic slave trade and sold by a West African country to white slave traders and taken to the Caribbean or America, the idea that person right now deserves compensation, that's a nonsense.
And it doesn't deal with the complexities of life now, quite apart from the fact it's unaffordable, given the pressures on the economy and so on. We just need a more grown-up conversation amongst countries about what we do to tackle these issues now.
Maybe Caribbean nations need to have a grown-up conversation among themselves about why they are, with beautiful islands, fantastic tourist destinations, why they are doing so badly.
And because issues of governance, issues about how countries are run, they are also very much in the mix. And very often people are willing to talk about that, for example, aspects of corruption and so on and so forth. These things do have to be, civic values and so on. These things also have to be addressed in order to raise people from poverty and from situations which
working hard, trade and good governance and law and order tend to be the things that live. And if a lot of those countries delivered that, they might find that would work. Martyn Whittock, historian and author, thank you very much indeed for that. Very quick word from Sam Armstrong, sitting here very patiently.
The only thing unique about Britain's history on slavery is that we ended it. Every country, everywhere on earth did it until we came along and we stopped it. That's it. It
is just not even... the fact that someone like a multimillionaire Lenny Henry talking about this abject... The idea that I would have to contribute to taxes, to pay, to give money to him, what an absolute load of nonsense.